every laugh, every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Hi, beautiful people. If you are watching me on the replay, thank you so much for watching me. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. And I talk to people that are doing things to empower the lives of others by kind of sharing their story. And if you're new to me, I have a podcast that you can listen to on all podcasting platforms called Celeste the Therapist Podcast. And the goal is to shift the way you think. And I've been podcasting since 2018 of July. And this video platform that I come on Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time has been happening for the last 2 months. And it's been going amazing. So today I have a really special guest. She is amazing and does really great work. And so we're going to have a conversation. Before we have this conversation, I just kind of wanted to put up this crisis text line, 741-741. If you find yourself struggling and want to connect to a crisis counselor, you have no other outlets, this is one outlet. I also highly recommend for people to look at resources in their area and not do this alone, because doing this alone is hard. And one thing about our thoughts and when they're negative is that, hey Tiff, one thing about our thoughts and when they're negative is that it can start to take over and it can feel so real, right? And so one of the things about my guest today, she is a yoga practitioner, and she's really gonna help us think about some ways to kind of ground and ground ourselves, right? Especially with everything that's going on today. Because one thing about what I want to be clear on is that you have power, and so many things have taken place where it feels like we're powerless. And I don't want people to feel defeated, right? And so we have power, and I really want us to learn how to tap into that power so that we don't allow the circumstances that are taking place around us to dictate where we feel like we can go or where we are in our lives. We have so much power. So I'm going to bring Marlene to the platform, and I'm going to have her introduce herself to you guys. Hello, Marlene, can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. Hello, folks. My name is Marlene Boyette, and I am a Boston resident and a yoga and wellness practitioner here in the city of Boston. I'm also an educator, so I teach yoga and mindfulness at an elementary school to children ages 4 through 12. And when I'm not at the school, I am servicing the community.
That's good. That's for me, in my opinion, that's a tough age group to work with. How is it? Yeah, I work with adults. So How is it working with the little? I know we need you though, Marlene, because I got little ones. But how is it working with them?
I love it. So a little backstory. I was a preschool teacher before I came into my role as a yoga instructor at this school. And so I had been a preschool teacher for about 7 years at a different school. And so I have always had a passion for, children. And, when I was very small, for most of my life, actually, my grandmother owned a large childcare center in Texas. And she did a lot of community things with youth. So I think, although I didn't want to have anything to do with it then, I think it kind of, stuck with me. And I love doing yoga with the little kids. It's so much fun. Yeah.
No, that's good. And I really wish it was more mainstreamed, in our systems, because it's a technique that I learned as an adult that has proven to really worked wonders on mindfulness and how I'm able to know, like, regardless of what emotion I'm feeling, I'm okay. And that it's going to change. I'm not always going to feel that way. And that's something that most of us aren't like self-aware of. How is it that you go from being a preschool teacher to a yoga practitioner? Because that's pretty
It's a jump.
Extreme.
It was not planned. Well, it was, but not in the way that it ended up panning out. So
it never is. I wasn't planning on having a podcast in 2020, right?
Right.
So I want to. It's never that way, but I want to hear how it happened for you.
So I had been teaching, and I had worked for an organization in Cambridge for a really long time that they're very dear to my heart. And then I left there and taught preschool at another place that I worked for a few years but didn't love. And then was asked to come back to the original place where I was teaching to help them develop their programming. So I did that, and I was happy there, but I had never been more tired. Like I was physically exhausted, like after teaching preschool for that many years. And I was practicing yoga, but, still just feeling like, okay, so what's next? And I was also sharing yoga with children there as well. And I started to think, like, as the year was coming to a close and I was wrapping up my trauma-informed yoga certification program, I just was like, what's the next step? Like, are you going to continue to teach preschool? Or are you just going to like see what it is like to teach yoga full time and kind of give it a go? So I did. I said that I wouldn't be returning, and I left teaching, and I took a job at the studio where I was trained, and I had linked up with a few organizations in Boston, and I wasn't planning at all on being back in a school. It was not my plan. And I had met a young woman several months before who was a photographer, and I had invited her to come photograph me at a yoga event at a museum in Boston. She came, and when she took the images and sent them back to me, she sent me a link to my job. And she said, I photographed you, so I watched you all day with families and children, and it really seems like this is like something that you're really good at. And I don't know, like, what you do, because at that point, our relationship was not very developed. She was a friend of a friend. But I looked at it and I was like, a yoga and mindfulness instructor in a school? Like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Me neither.
And so I'm like, I don't have a yoga resume. Like, I don't even know, how do you do that? So I did a lot of Googling, and I put together like my educational resume with the yoga resume, and I sent it off, and it literally happened in days. I think she sent that to me on a Monday. I think I sent my resume to the school on a Tuesday. They had me in on a Wednesday. They sent someone to observe me because I was teaching at an organization in Boston. So they sent someone to watch me with the students. And then like that night, they offered me
God, stop playing. That's so dope.
It's crazy. So I always tell the person, her name is Lauren Miller. And I always tell her all the time, like, I'm like, you have no idea like how much of a role you played. And I believe in alignment. So I don't think it was, a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence, but just the way things happen, when I tell people, they're like, that's crazy. But it happened like that. And I've been there since then.
That's awesome, because both of your worlds have merged, and now you're able to like do what you love on all levels, which is awesome.
Exactly.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is something that you put on your website about these 4 needs that we need. Sure. You say a need to be understood, cared for, a need to feel safe, a need to be encouraged, and a need to experience joy and playful. Like, why is it that those needs stick out for you as something that you wanted to be clear with people on?
So for myself, and I try mostly to speak in I sentences, understanding that everyone's experience is different. I think about times when I have felt the most joy and the times when I have felt like the most like isolation or like sadness, you know, anything like that. And like what in the moments of isolation and sadness or detachment, like what is void in those moments, right? And so it, you know, if you're feeling misunderstood or unseen, it can bring about those feelings. If you're feeling unsafe, right? Unstable in a situation or unsafe in an environment. If you're lacking encouragement and support. And if you don't have outlets to really like be yourself and like tap into like your joy and like your playful side, like I feel like all of those things kind of, they make life less enjoyable, right? And so
it does. And I think that, so the things about the safe and the security, all of those things you're mentioning are so important, but some of us respond to the lack of the security, and we can't even like pinpoint that that's what it is, like that we're missing. Right. How would you like recommend someone being able to like tap into that to understand? Because one thing for me that is clear when something's wrong is like the body stuff that's happening in my body. Someone is asking, feeling unseen. Can you share a broader definition? So tell me a little bit about how someone can really like understand and tap into those needs that they might not even realize is there.
Right. So I think that the most important component, like thing about these things is that you can provide each of these for yourself, right?
Yeah.
So instead of seeking like the outside, like validation to feel safe, to feel, you know, understood, you have to create a foundation of these things, right? You have to develop your relationship with yourself, which is a long process and an ongoing process. It's not something that, you know, you wake up one day and you're like, all right, I know myself. Like, you know, it's a process, and we change, we evolve. Like, so we're always learning new things about ourselves. But I think it really starts with like coming to acknowledge like times in your life. Like, I think for me, thinking about like my childhood, thinking about like my upbringing, thinking about my schooling, my education, like the environments that I was educated in, my relationships with family members and friends, that was how I was able to understand like those pieces of what I was provided with, what maybe I could have been provided more with, and what I can do for myself. I hope I'm answering this properly. Okay. And it really began there, like being very transparent with myself about, you know, what my needs were and are, and like, how can I provide these things for myself so that if a relationship comes to an end, or if a relationship is not providing that, or so that I'm not seeking these things out in other people, you know, because other people are not always going to be around, and other people need to take care of themselves, so they're not always able to provide you with these things.
That's good. And I started off this show saying like we have power, but we haven't tapped into it. So basically you're saying I had to be real with myself, sit with myself, understand what I need. And the thing about what Marlene is saying, the thing about being able to understand your needs and that you have the control is that you are not waiting for somebody else to change how you feel. And a lot of times I hear people say like, well, you made me feel this way, or it's because of you. And I'm constantly reminding people that they have power. But a lot of times we forget, because sometimes, you know, we're tapped into our childhood where we really did not have any power. And because it's unprocessed, it just merges with the current state that we're in.
Exactly.
And we forget that we're actually like whole human beings, and that we can decide like what we're going to do or not do, whether we're going to stay in that relationship or not stay in that relationship. Does that make sense?
Total sense. It's true. Like you said, like I think a lot of times we're triggered, right? Or brought to a place, not necessarily because of what's happening in the moment, but because of the memories or the attachments that we have to something that happened, like you said, in our childhood or in our past. So a lot of, me coming to these 4 things was thinking about what I had, because, I come from a loving family, but no family is perfect, and I have like support systems in place, but I needed to get to a place where I wasn't looking outward for these things. And when I talk to more people, in yoga spaces about, the things that they're working through, these 4 things were the things that people were kind of seeking and struggling with, or like looking to tap back into or reconnect with.
And Camille is saying, hey, Camille, I think we become victims of allowing others to captivate our thoughts. You think that's accurate?
I do. I think that we give a lot of our power away to other people, whether it be friends, family, coworkers, we do, without realizing it, without realizing that certain ways that we engage with people is really like allowing them to, consume our thoughts, our energy.
Absolutely.
That's why it's so important to be grounded and connected and aware, so that when that happens, you know what I mean? Even if you get caught up for a moment, that you're able to see it for what it is, and reel yourself back in, like, okay, like I might, I was here for it for a second, but let me
reel it back in.
Yeah, it's important. It's a skill to be able to do that,
Marlene, it is a skill. And I tell people, if I'm driving, somebody cuts me off, I'll be wanting to put my finger up, and then I say, hold on for a second. Why did I let this person make me do this? Like, why did I use that language? And if you ever hear yourself saying, this person did this, and if you're always blaming other people, start to change your language and ask yourself, like, hold on, why did I allow that to just happen, even if it wasn't your fault?
Exactly. I have, I often will ask a person, if I'm like present with somebody and something like that happens, I'm just like, do you think they were doing that to you though? Like, like they're not thinking about you. Like it wasn't personal. And I mean, when I say that they're not thinking about you, a lot of the things that people do, it's less about us and it has everything to do with them, And I think in the moment that's really hard to remember also, but that's another thing that I've had to remind myself of. I mean, obviously take accountability for the role that you play in situations, but be mindful that a lot of times it's not you. It's not they're not doing it to you. Like they're engaged with you, but something's going on within them,
Yes. And I just want to answer Camille's question. What do you think is a good starting place to reduce this? Practicing mindfulness is huge.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Self-awareness, like, is such it's everything when it comes to mindfulness, being aware of your triggers, right? The things that set you off, like your edges, as we like to call them, or doing like your shadow work I know people talk a lot about that. So that's, I think, a phrase that people are familiar with right now. But really becoming familiar with yourself and being real with yourself about the things that annoy you and get on your nerves, and, so that when you find yourself engaged in these situations, you already are at a space of knowing, like, this is something that's challenging for me to engage in.
Mm-hmm,
So how far am I going to go into this when I already know that it's a trigger for me? Like,
yes.
you know?
No, that's good. And the part about being real with yourself, I'm telling you now, that's a hard thing to do, to admit that like you are the common denominator. I say that just from personal experience. And I know a lot of people struggle because our ego kind of doesn't want to let us go that way.
I mean, for myself, I have to be like, Marlene, now you don't do that. You know what I mean? Or like, why do you do that? And it's funny because I think often also because I'm a yoga instructor and I practice it in my personal life, but I didn't always practice yoga, and that other like Marlene, like when we were kids and it was like the angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the other. It's like, that's real.
It's so real, yo. It's
like your aware self and like your shadow self.
Yeah, I wasn't always Celeste the therapist.
At odds, like, is it gonna be Marlene the yogi today? It's real. It's very real. I think that is such a great like representation that we don't probably think about, but because we saw it when we were children. But it's real. You have to have that by myself meeting, like, okay, I'm not going to do this with you today.
Not today.
I'm not going to allow myself to go there. It's important to be able to check yourself.
Yes. So one of the things Marlene does, she's very passionate about trauma, right? And I always ask my guests for some tips to kind of help us with what is going on. And today just happens to be a couple days after the entire nation watch George Floyd die or get murdered, right? And for me, I seen the picture. I didn't know what it was. And I think about, I'm a very grounded person, like I feel like I'm like very grounded, and it really rocked me and it shook me. And just talking about it now just really upsets me a lot. And I think about, and so like, I know I'm going to be okay, right? Like, I know like what I'm feeling now is going to pass. And I have these like skills to kind of work through what I'm feeling. And that's work that I've done. And I think about people that have not done this work and are kind of, when I say forced to see in it, like I don't watch the news. Like, you can't not see what happened. You can't you can't not see it, And I'm just curious about like how you have coped with it, and if you can help us think about some ways to ground ourselves around this, because it's trauma, it's very traumatic to see that. And when you're a person of color and you see these things over and over again, I speak to people all the time, and the amount of paranoia around going out and around everything, I'm constantly not just watching it on the news, but I'm listening to people share their pain. And so that's very hard. Right. So I just kind of want to hear about your thoughts and thinking about ways we can like work through this.
Sure. So I'll speak first about my response or how I felt. So I happened to come across it like unknowingly. I also don't watch the news very frequently. I watch it maybe like once a week. So I still haven't had my television on since like Sunday or over the weekend, something like that, Friday maybe. But I came across the video not knowing what it was. And it was early in the day, so I'm assuming it had just recently been posted. And I watched it, and as I watched it, I'm asking myself, like, he's dying? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I just couldn't believe it, and I still, it's not that I can't believe it because it's so shocking to me, because I feel like at this point, unfortunately, we are becoming so familiar with these happenings that although we're shocked in the moment, that we're just like, wow, it's happened again, right? So I watched it. I didn't watch anything else after that for like hours, right? And then I saw another video which showed like a different view. And I just got off my phone for a while, you know, like I went outside. I have a back porch, so I sat outside for a while, and thought about it, you know, and talked to some family members about it. I still hadn't turned on the news, and I don't know that I will. And then today I had a conversation with a childhood friend who is a Latina, and she's living in Brooklyn, and we talked about it. I'm still processing it, you know, I'm processing it as a woman of color. I'm processing it as a woman of color who lives in although my neighborhood is considered to be diverse, it's very white. I'm living as an educator, right? And thinking about my students, and if they are aware, so I'm processing it on a lot of different levels. But I'm also not forcing myself to view, right? I'm not forcing myself to have conversations. And I'm reminding myself that I am in control of the conversations that I want to have, that I don't, even though this has happened, I don't have to have these conversations right now. And that I can process it in a way that feels good to me. I'll probably journal about it and just like release like the thoughts that I have. You know, but I think it's important for folks to be able to, or to learn how to like separate yourself, so that you can be in control of the amount of information that you're receiving. Absolutely. Because when we have our phones in our hands and our laptops and the news is on, that's like a bombarding of trauma, and you're reliving, you know what I mean? Like it over and over and over again. The same thing with conversations, especially if you're having conversations with folks who don't share the same viewpoint as you in terms of what happened. It can be traumatic also. So I think monitoring the amount of access that you're giving yourself to the information, not because you want to ignore it, but because you're traumatizing yourself, and then you're re-traumatizing yourself. And, you know, I think that we all can receive the information and acknowledge that this has happened, that this man his life was taken from him unnecessarily. Like there's no justification for it. And sitting with that and processing that in a way that feels good. Yeah. Then being mindful of like how you're going to move forward as the days go on, you know?
Yeah, no, that's good. And I feel like super emotional when you talk about the kids. And I was looking at it, and then and my daughter, she goes like, "What happened?" She's like, and she's like, "Why would a police kill a guy?" You know? And she's 7, and I think about kids that are older, right, who understand a lot deeper than she does. And what are they thinking? What kind of conversations? And you know, if you're a parent listening to this, like you can't ignore the conversation, because what happens is that the kids will try to figure it out on their own and make it make sense. And sometimes, you know, I work with adults, and the way they've learned how to make it make sense is that it's their fault. And trying to, you know, answer the questions as best as possible, because, you know, sheltering or when you say you're sheltering your kids, you're not really setting them up for the real world. And so many adults struggle. Their parents love them so much that they didn't want them to see life, but life is going to happen. And it's important for us to like, be honest as much as we can.
It really is. That was, part of my conversation today with my childhood friend. The school where I teach, like, we're obviously in remote learning right now, but the mission of the school is very much embedded in social justice, right? Mm-hmm. And so a person who sends their child to our school, we're thinking that they are aware of, our mission and like our goals and the things that we're teaching children. But I was thinking, in general, not just in regard to like our student body, but of the parents who often think that their child is too young to have certain conversations, right? And I have found, like, in my experience, not just in my role at the place where I'm employed now, but in other spaces with children, is that the children are aware. Yeah. They hear things, they hear conversations. They're one of the biggest receptors when it comes to like energy and like just like being able to know when something's off. Yeah. So, I feel like it's almost like I hate to use this word, but I'm going to say it. It's almost a betrayal because the children know that something is wrong or like something is going on. Mm-hmm. And so when you don't, obviously I don't feel it's necessary to share all of the details, right, because their processing is, like their development, like they're not at a place where they can process that.
Right.
But speaking to children about what's going on in the world right now is important. It's the difference between, them being aware and conscious and developing empathy and compassion for people who don't look like them, who are experiencing things. And then for children who are Black and brown, who are watching or hearing about people who look like them being murdered in the street by people who are supposed to protect them. Mm-hmm. It's important, it's important to let them know that these things are happening, and that it's not right, and that we don't have all the answers, right, but that it's okay to not have all the answers,
Yeah. That's good. And I think that's why we steer away sometimes, because we don't have the answers. I talk about mental health a lot because it's so stigmatizing. Am I going to change how stigmatizing it is in everybody's life? No, but if I can touch one person, right? And so like, I really hope that, if you're listening to this, that you kind of use your power, whatever that looks like, in your own household, in your own neighborhood. And don't think because you don't have a platform or that like you can't like make any changes, like even just conversation, you can make changes. And it really starts within us. Ignoring it is not helpful, because our body keeps the score. And I'm glad that it's you today, because you understand this more than anything. Doing what you do is that our body like really will hold on to pain, and we call ourselves running away from our mind or running away from the pain, but you can't run away from who you are. Like it's like when you think about it logically, it's not possible. And a lot of times we self-medicate, we shop, we go in and out of relationships just to numb the pain. And, when you do that, I feel like you lose part of yourself, right? When you try to like escape from the pain. And so like leaning into it and feeling it is going to be important. Would you agree with that?
I do agree. Emotionally, things that we ignore, they do show up in the body. They show up as tension, they show up as headaches, they show up as sleeplessness, they show up in a list of ways that we might not even connect to, but like you said, you can't run away from these things. And we think like, okay, so I'm just going to put it to the side. I'm going to move on. But it's so important to process these things and to work through them, whether it's like talking to someone or writing, journaling,
Yes.
developing some kind of a practice, whether not just yoga, but even just, mindfulness practices of drawing more attention and more awareness to like everyday activities can be therapeutic as well. And,
Yeah.
Really being present with yourself and paying attention to how you're feeling. I mean, it's so interesting to me because I don't know, like social media to me brings such an awareness of the detachment that folks make with emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And almost the normalizing of detachment from emotions, and like, you're doing a good thing if you if you can detach from a feeling or compartmentalize it, rather than just being in the moment and present with that emotion, like you said in the beginning, acknowledging that it is going to pass and it's not something that has to stay with you.
Yeah.
Moving through it so that you can move past it.
Yeah.
But the normalizing of ignoring emotions is so terrifying to me. And it's
So
become
bad.
like a cultural like thing, like a societal like expectation to that, like a valor, like a,
I'm
like
good.
a badge of
Yeah.
honor if you can be like detached.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is so unhealthy. I'm like, you really don't understand what you're doing to yourself in the long run. I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to be present, with your feelings and really like do your best to like work through them, even if you don't understand them all, so that they're not showing up later in other spaces in your life.
That's so good. That's so good. You're like spot on. And I think that if you're listening to this and this is the first time you're kind of hearing this kind of conversation about exploring your feelings and tapping into them, I want you to challenge yourself. Like, get you an emotion chart. Like I have a book, but I literally like have this like emotion chart that I had created that's in my journal, because, and it's in the beginning of it, right? And every day I ask people like, how are you feeling? Because I believe that when I can understand what I'm feeling, I may not be able to change it, right? Because I'm not a robot, I'm human. But when I can like name what I'm feeling, it allows me to get through what I'm going through in a different way than when I don't name it. When I don't name what I'm feeling, then guess what's going to happen? My behaviors are going to be all over the place, and I'm going to feel like I'm not in control. And then I'm just going to spiral. And so like when you're finding yourself spiraling, try to like realm it back and ask yourself like how am I feeling right now? Like what's affecting me right now? And whether we're talking about this incident that's happening or anything in your life, it's such an important practice to start to tap into, because that's where you start to have power. I'm so grateful that I have this knowledge, because now I feel so much more confident about my kids as they grow, because they know how they feel, they know how to tap into their emotions, and I feel like I'm setting them up for success, right? The clothes, whatever they have, that's not the material things that America teaches us, that's why we gotta be unbothered, because we gotta keep climbing the ladder of success. Right. But people are climbing the ladder of success and they're so unhappy. There's no peace, there's no stillness. And so like, if you want to figure out how to get to that point, you got to really understand what you're feeling.
It's true. That's one of the first things that I ask my students when we begin class, once everybody, comes together and sits and even right now remotely, is how are you feeling?
Yes.
How are you feeling right now? It doesn't, and I tell them like, if it's not good, that's okay. Yeah. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be good for you to say like how you're feeling, and you don't have to be embarrassed if you're not feeling good. Yes. I'm like, I tell them all the time, I'm like, even adults, grown-ups, I'm like, even Miss Boyette has days where I'm not feeling it. I'm here, but I'm not feeling it, and I'm like, it's important, I think, as for children to get in the habit of, talking about how they feel and being asked, and not just not just being prompted, but also listening.
Yes.
I think like people will ask you, think about how many times a person has asked you in your life, like, how are you doing? And then they're on to the next thing, right? Like they don't, not to say they don't care,
But it's the norm to say, fine, thank you. That's everybody's response.
But are you really though?
Yeah.
Are you really fine?
Yeah.
You're probably not, you know what I mean? And I also feel like I'm big on making sure that you don't like emotionally dump onto people who are not prepared to hold that space for you. But I do think it's important, if you're asking, to get out of the habit of asking people how they're doing if you really are not, if you're not willing to listen.
Yeah.
I think it's another one of those cultural, like societal, like things that we do, like, how you doing? But we're not really prepared to hold space for the person to say, like, I'm not doing well today.
Right.
Like, I'm not doing well.
That's good. And this is a really good conversation. I feel like individuals, parents, are going to be able to get something out of this. A big takeaway I want you guys to take away with is mindfulness and tapping into your inner self, right? As Marlene said earlier, there's a lot of things that we need that we don't even know we need. And so like really like sitting with yourself and trying to figure out what that looks like for you, right? You use I because what Marlene needs and what Celeste needs looks different. But I got to understand what that looks like. So yeah, this was amazing.
Good. I enjoyed it. I did want to circle back because someone had asked in the beginning if I can elaborate. Do we have time for me to elaborate on that?
It was about being seen.
Yeah, being seen. So what I mean by that is feeling like if you're in a space, right, that you can show up as your full self, right, that you can be your authentic self, whether it's at work, whether it's in your relationships, your interactions with people, or even the relationship you have with yourself. Like, do you feel like, like you're masquerading as something that you're not, or that you are covering up components of yourself for whatever reason? I think we do it for various reasons, but I think there are times when we don't feel seen, right? When you're talking to someone or you're engaged in a conversation or at work and you're like, I'm showing up as a version of myself, right? It's not my authentic self. And sometimes I think, unfortunately, sadly, I think there are times when it's hard to get around that, especially in work environments. I think a lot of people have to put on a face, a mask. If you're blessed and gifted enough to be in a space where like you're welcomed as your whole self, and I think that that's wonderful. But I realize that a lot of people are not. But that can be isolating, and it can also be detaching, from like your essence, right? And so I think when I'm leading like meditations or at different points in yoga classes, I ask people to tap into that, like reminding people that your essence, right? Like that light, your pure self, like your childlike self is ever present, right? It's always there. I think that life experiences have kind of like covered up our essence, right? And kind of separated us from it a little bit. And it takes some peeling back. I've heard people compare it to like an onion, like the peeling back of the layers of an onion to come to like the center of like your purest component of yourself, your most joyous, like your most authentic, your most transparent part of yourself. But reminding people that it's there, you just have to do the work to like access it and be reminded that it's there, regardless of what our experiences have been in life, regardless of the things that have happened to us. As long as you have breath, I believe that you have access to that component of yourself. And so,
yes, that's good. And what Marlene is saying, basically, wearing a mask is draining. When you can't be who you are, it's draining on your system, on your body. It weighs you down. And to be able to be seen and be who you are, and that onion that you're talking about, start peeling it back, because you'll like what you see.
you'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah, you'll have a lot of fun. You won't feel weighed down anymore,
Right.
because you're being you. And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing to be.
Yeah, it's like a reunion, with yourself.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's good. Tell people how they can reach you. If you guys love Marlene like I do, follow her on Instagram, and tell people about your website and what they can find on your website.
Sure. So my website is listed. It's coming across the screen. There's information on events. I'm in the process of updating it right now. So there'll be updated classes and things like that. Information on like programming, information on private sessions, which I do offer even remotely. Basically anything that I'm doing is updated on the website. I'm revamping it right now. So I'd say probably by tomorrow or Friday at the latest, there'll be some new information on there. But anything you're curious about in terms of like how to access me is on that site, or just what I do or how I came to do what I do. And also on Instagram, if you have Instagram, I'm on there, and it's Marlene Boyette. I try to share like inspirational things, and it's me being me on there and trying to inspire people to do the same.
Yes. And we appreciate you for that. This was amazing. And I thank you for your time, my dear.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, that was so good. Thank you guys for being here. Jessica, as children develop love, empathy, compassion, and grace when they grow up and are exposed to the real world and recognize as an adult they were protected from the reality. You're welcome, Shelley, of police brutality. How should they cope with that? Is there a way that parents can start educating children as they get older to start preparing them for the harsh realities, to help them understand what's going on, so when they are faced with these adversities, they will not spiral out of control? They won't spiral out of control and act out their emotions. That was really good, Jessica. So when they grow up and are exposed to the real world and recognize so the part about, and this is a struggle that I see often, where, let me just put this up, where adults learn, when they turn 20, 21, the things of life, and it's shocking, right? And there's like this grieving period that happens, right? And grieving, we think about grieving more like when somebody passes away, but you can grieve the loss of something that you were, that was dear to you, right? And so a life that you thought was real, where there was like nothing bad going on, that you have to mourn the loss of like what you thought was your reality, and work on accepting what is. And that's a really hard process to do, right? There's these range of emotions that are going to happen for people that are trying to get acclimated to the real life, the real world of what's happening now. And so that's something that just kind of takes time, right? You're going through a healing process. It's a day by day thing. As far as the parents who have kids and want to kind of prepare them, I feel like the best thing you can do to prepare your children for life is to allow them, like what me and Marlene was talking about, to kind of understand what they are feeling, understand like what bothers them, because things are going to bother them. Not being a robot, a lot of us grew up in households where so you're supposed to be seen and not heard. And having a how are you feeling type of conversation was not on the table. And it's unfortunate, right? But a lot of us grew up in systems where, we were just in survival mode. So it's unfortunate that was the case. But like now, I feel like we owe ourselves to educate ourselves on working on our inside stuff. And the inside stuff is what we can't see. And the unfortunate part about that, and I like to use analogies if you've never listened to me before, but one of the things about what we do is I say, if I'm sitting at the dinner table and I'm eating and I cut my hand and my hand just starts bleeding, the average person is not going to keep eating as blood is dripping in their food, right? Or just I'm going to go to work. I don't have time to put a bandage on. I don't have time to figure out what's going on. I'm just going to allow it to bleed. And what happens with us as we are traumatized, as we are struggling, we are bleeding, right? And we're bleeding everywhere. It's manifesting. Marlene talked about this in the podcast. It's literally manifesting everywhere. And we are not making the connections, right? We're not stopping to figure out what's going on. And one of the things I'm big on when I talk to people is helping them make the connection. Because when you make the connection and when you start to understand, oh, okay, I get it. I'm doing this because blah, blah, blah. It's easier to have a little bit more patience with yourself. If you feel if you don't know what's going on, if I go to the doctor and the doctor's like, Celeste, you're bleeding. I don't know why you're bleeding, but ain't nothing I can do for you. I feel like I'm going to spiral out of control because I don't really understand what's going on. But if I understand that a lot of my behaviors derived from my environment, or derived from my trauma, or derived from, the things that I was exposed to, then I'll be like, okay, I get it, right? That inner child that Marlene talked about. She talked about so many amazing things that are so important for us to really understand. And all of these things that we talked about today are things you can't tangibly hold on to. You can't see pain, you can't see trauma, but it shows up, right? If we start to sit and pay attention, we'll see that it's showing up in different ways. And so the reason why I started this podcast is because I really wanted people to know there's more than one way to heal. Even though she's a yoga instructor, she said pick up a practice. It could be meditation, right? It could be journaling, but trying to figure out what you can do and not just do anything, right? And I think a lot of times when we're struggling, we don't do anything because we don't really know what to do. And that's just the way it always is. And so it's a sad reality, but you can get comfortably uncomfortable feeling how you feel. It can be an uncomfortable norm that you just kind of learn to live with. And I wanted to tell people that we don't have to live that way. We don't have to live in survival mode all the time. We can have peace in the midst of chaos. And so many of us have never even thought that was possible. So when people come on and kind of share their stories and share what they do, it really helps and it resonates for a lot of people. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that makes sense. I'm grateful to you guys for rocking out with me. Hey, Zion. Hey, Shelly. Hey, Afrobeat. I'm grateful for you guys rocking out with me and following my podcast. I have surpassed 100,000 downloads, so I'm so excited about that. I'm going to have an online celebration next Friday, the 100K Toast. There are going to be sponsors and giveaways. Oh, thank you, Shelly. There's going to be sponsors and giveaways at this online event that's going to take place next Friday on Zoom. And I'm really excited because I had to start at 1 to get to 100,000. This is episode 210. And so a lot of you who are on Periscope right now, thank you, Todd. Hi, Todd. A lot of you who are on Periscope, because I'm streaming on 3 different platforms, but I've been on Periscope the longest. I actually started doing what I do on Periscope. And so a lot of people who have been rocking with me, for like 5 years or so. And I appreciate y'all. I was just going on social media before I even hopped on the podcast. So if you're not following the podcast, you can follow it everywhere. It's Celeste the Therapist Podcast, and it's streaming in over 100 countries. So that's so exciting. So thank you guys so much. We'll be back tomorrow. So Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can always catch me streaming, talking to somebody that's doing something to empower other people. Starting next Wednesday, I will just be me on Wednesdays, giving like some solution-focused material and answering questions about mental health. So people said that they missed that, and I haven't done that in a couple of months. Thank you, Margaret. I haven't done that in a couple of months, so we're going to start that back on next Wednesday. I'll be answering questions about mental health. We'll be talking about my favorite mental health. We'll be talking about everything, and so like I'm really excited and grateful to you guys. So until next time, guys. I love you, and I will talk to you later.
Every laugh, every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity, and make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste the Therapist. Let's go.